A few days ago, a player started snooping in on the current situation of the lead narrative designer for World of Warcraft, Steve Danuser, on LinkedIn and discovered that actually he was no longer the lead narrative designer of World of Warcraft. And actually this had been true for already a few months by this point. So, the news then spread that Steve Danuser himself had recently left Blizzard. The official explanation was the interest in trying something new, as well as the difficulty of settling in with the Blizzard's requirements of return to office enforcement and having to go back working from Irvine, where Blizzard is located and where Danuser was not at. However, of course, players went on a different direction.
Everyone, please welcome my friend and the executive creative director of the Warcraft universe, Chris Metzen.
The direction that, obviously, we have recently gotten the announcement of the World Soul Saga, the triple expansion reveal at last BlizzCon, where Chris Metzen himself had his comeback announced as the executive creative director of World of Warcraft, and would have taken charge as a result of the narrative of the game. So obviously that kind of makes it awkward for the lead narrative designer of the game if you bring Chris Metzen back. So many players thought that might have been the reason. We are bringing back Metzen, so as a result we are gonna kick out whoever was before him. Now, as you might not be too surprised, this has been met with, I would say, roaring success by many players who have not gotten that much of a liking for Steve Danuser in the past few years. However, even if I myself have not been too much of a fan of the current and recent storylines in World of Warcraft, starting from BFA, but of course culminating in the disaster class that was Shadowlands, we have to point out, just for fairness, that quite a few of the accusations brought towards Danuser actually weren't even his fault. Yes, we can of course still fault him for someone who actually did enjoy Season 8 of Game of Thrones, but besides that, we have to say that likely quite a few of the things that, for example, Shadowlands was accused of in terms of terrible writing, he wasn't even the main culprit, because most, at least the first half of the Shadowlands storyline, had been carried on by Afrasiabi and not by Danuser, who took on in the second part, in the latter part of Shadowlands, and then was in full control of the Dragonflight storyline, the Dragonflight narrative. However, players even since Shadowlands put most of the focus on him. He used to be quite the vocal character, even on social media, especially gaining attention due to basically looking like a self-insert of Nathanos who would be simping, pathetically even, for Sylvanas. That's kind of the main thing. And then, of course, you then discover later on that Nathanos and Sylvanas were a thing, romantically involved, which made things even more weird. So players basically saw the crumbling storyline, the terrible choices all around Shadowlands, and then they noticed that the lead narrative designer was basically in love with the main character, the main villain of the story, and self-inserted himself as her lackey. You know, that's kind of sad. Now, even if we take out that pretty sad part of the choices of design for Shadowlands, you still have to talk about Dragonflight, which was his product, after all. Dragonflight had received some complaints, we can say. We even had a video about it, about how the Dragonflight expansion so far felt like some Disney adventure for children. It's a lot of feel-good and quite harmless and fluffy feelings all around the expansion. The theme and the gravity of the situation isn't very in line with the previous Warcraft themed stories. The power of friendship is stronger than ever. The stakes in the game are also quite low compared to what we have been used to in the past. Many players also had this feeling that we quit the expansion halfway through our main threat, as many players assumed of the big baddies of the expansion. We would have done a slow rise towards the main guy, perhaps starting with Razaget, moving up to Farak, maybe moving up to Viranov, and then eventually moving up to Iridikron. Instead, we just stopped straight in our tracks on Farak. Viranov turned sides over to ours, and Iridikron is just gone with the wind. So much of the storyline of Dragonflight was also not particularly appreciated by much of the player base. Not that the expansion itself, of course, hasn't been considered a good one, it's just that in general the storyline and most of the happenings within the story, within the cutscenes, within the major turns in the story of the expansion has not been a particularly grandiose one. We have been quite on the low side of things for this expansion. A few players might like it. After all, every expansion we often have the requests of many players to lower the stakes of the expansion, to not make us the usual champion, leader, god tier guy who has to come in and stop the world from being destroyed by a massive entity. Like we have gotten complaints of this happening in Shadowlands, in BFA, in Legion, even before that in Warlords. Instead, this expansion, the stakes have been toned down heavily, which some players did enjoy. But overall, it seems like the departure of Steve Danuser has been considered a victory for many players. Obviously, at the same time, many players have also been appreciative of the return of Chris Metzen. It's pretty funny remembering the old days where it was Metzen who was in the same position of Steve Danuser in terms of receiving flack from the community. If you guys all remember the good old days of the Green Jesus complaints, of the storyline revolving a bit too much around Thrall, being a bit too much of a Mary Sue character throughout the story of the game. But what was the feeling of most of the player base when playing the game was still this genuine feel of World of Warcraft, the genuine feel of the Warcraft themes around the storylines, something that has felt a little bit lacking recently in the narrative of the game, both in Shadowlands and even now in Dragonflight. This is hardly a storyline reminiscent of the WoW, typical WoW traits of your leaders and of the enemies. It's been quite a different approach to the narrative in Dragonflight so far, and therefore we can say for the entire expansion, since pretty much the story of Dragonflight has wrapped up in this last patch. So yeah, according to the player base, we are now rejoicing because the Sylvanas Simp is now gone and we are back to the days of Chris Metzen. We will of course see what's going to happen through the development of the World Soul Saga, although, much like players pointed out, for a good part of Shadowlands it wasn't even Steve Danuser who actually made the story, but it was someone else. The same will go for the World Soul Saga. Quite a few of the initial development of the next expansion will still be done through the lead of Steve Danuser, even after he left, right? Metzen came in during the announcement a few weeks before the announcement of the World Soul Saga, which means the previous lead narrative designer has had quite a lot of room to start developing the story of the next expansion. So even if you're leaving now, you will still have your decision and choices carry on, at least for the first part of the next expansion. So we won't see fully the effect of a new leadership immediately in the next expansion, but it will take a while before Chris Metzen will have his lead fully on for the development of the narrative of the game. However, this was the worldwide news for today. The removal or the dismissal or the leaving of the lead narrative designer of World of Warcraft over for a new leadership going forward as we get closer to enter this new thing, the World Soul Saga, starting with the War Within at this point in a few months. So This was the bit of news, a bit further away from what we are used to, talking about the in-game activities as usual. This time we were a little bit more focused on the story direction of the game. So, on this Friday, I believe, we are now leaving each other. We are starting the goodbyes by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can, as usual, still be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Thank you guys again, of course, for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I know, he's probably getting way more shit than he deserves, but, you know, after the whole stunt simping for Sylvanas, he kind of asked for it.